Chapter 1341. Linus was furious as he raised an eyebrow. "You're not even bothered to put on an act anymore." Opening the car door, Ethan plucked Olivia off the snowy ground and pulled her into his embrace. "Since I can't hide it anyway, why should I put on any acts?" If Ethan had complete control over the Heath family, the whole world might as well be under his command. But perhaps even before that happened, Mason would have beaten him into a pulp. Mason didn't mind him too much, so he behaved himself. "If Liv refuses to return to the Miller family with me, I don't mind marrying into the Heath family." Linus stared at Ethan, who gave off the impression of a large and loving dog. Not long ago, the Heath family used every trick in the book to try and turn Ethan into their son-in-law. But now, Ethan was even willing to marry into the family. Sometimes, life was just too crazy. Linus commented, "In your dreams. Our home isn't a place where you can come and go as you wish. It doesn't matter whether you allow it or not, I'm coming in either way." Sensing the tension between the two, Olivia hastily interrupted, "You said just now that we're going to Mound Village, right? Why is that?" Crystal's paternal grandmother lives in the suburbs of Aldenvine, whereas her maternal grandmother lives in a rural fishing village. "If you want to hide the child, where would you place them?" "Mound Village." "Bingo. Also, my men found out that she had raised a girl before." Even though Olivia didn't ask for it, Ethan had helped her ask around in secret. He had fully appealed to Olivia. Linus snorted, "You're just grandstanding." They hurried over to Mound Village. The small village was in a remote area, and there wasn't much room for development. They only reached the entrance of the village. Inside the village, relatively old buildings and bumpy roads could be seen. The ride was extremely bumpy, and Olivia's body was raised off the seat on a few occasions. Ethan tried his best to hold her down. Olivia almost threw up because of the bumpy ride, so she asked for the car to stop while she got out and walked. The small fishing village looked quite desolate in winter. Thick ice covered the roads, and the sea breeze carried the salty smell of the ocean with it. Olivia stopped in her tracks. Looking in the direction she was gazing, Ethan noticed some purple flowers blooming on a cliff by the sea. "What's the matter, Liv?" Olivia shifted her gaze away from the flowers. "I'm just curious. I didn't expect to see purple ivies in a place like this." "True, they're quite rare." "Are they edible?" "The flowers and leaves can be turned into poison after they're dried, but the vines are poisonous. Purple ivies are quite picky about their environment, so for now, they still can't be cultivated artificially. They only appear on cliffs." Ethan asked, "Do you want them?" Olivia shook her head. "No, come on, we should be arriving soon." A car horn sounded in their ears. Turning around, they saw a Bentley behind them. They found it odd that an expensive car would appear in a place like this. When they were looking at the license plate number, a car window was lowered to reveal Yale's handsome yet fatigued face. His gaze fell upon Olivia's and Ethan's faces. "What brings you here?" Ethan crossed his arms. "I should be the one asking you that. Aren't you busy trying to sue Crystal?" "Why are you here?" Yale snorted. "Mind your business." With that, he closed the window and said coldly, "Speed up." "But there's a puddle in front of us." "Just go." When the car sped by, the water in the puddle was splashed onto Ethan's body. Stretching out his arms, Ethan shielded Olivia by hugging her. After the car left, Ethan picked up a pebble and hurled it at Yale's car. "Is he out of his mind?" Olivia was exasperated. "You're not any better." Chapter 1342. The driver looked at the crack in the rear window. "Mr. Kingston, the car." "Never mind that. Was the water splashed on him?" "Yes." "Good." The driver was speechless. It had always felt like Yale had been holding himself back. He would either explode in silence or do something twisted while still suppressing himself. Ever since Yale broke through the normal conventions and began to let loose, people rarely understood him. Olivia observed the buildings in the village. "Ethan, was this place eroded by natural disasters in the past?" "That's right, young lady. More than 20 years ago, there was a flood in our village. That flood was quite something. Our village is poor, and no one could patch things up, so the buildings remain the same as they were 20 years ago. An old man walked over to them. Are you here to invest in the village? Olivia and Ethan were dressed completely differently from the other residents of the village. They looked rich at first glance. Many villages were able to escape poverty and get rich, so the residents of this village admired the others a lot. They wished that some rich man would come over and invest in their village too. Olivia's expression shifted a little. Did the flood wash a young girl away? A young girl? I can't say for sure. Many people and houses were washed away back then. Ethan noticed the changes in Olivia's expression. Did you think of something? I'm not sure yet. Do you have cash on you? Ethan shook his head. Do checks work? Olivia fished out an unopened box of cigarettes from Ethan's pocket. Ethan turned red in the face. Liv, I smoke a little when I'm bored. I don't have that much of an addiction. Olivia handed the cigarettes to the old man. Sir, please help me. I'm looking for a young woman. She was about 7 when the flood happened. Her skin is very fair, and she has large eyes. She's in ill health too. The old man said, I can't possibly remember something from so long ago. It's not that I don't want to help you, but I'm getting old. Please try to remember, sir. The young girl lived with her grandmother, and there was no one else in that house. She has a sharp chin, and she's very skinny. Are you talking about that sickly child in the Wright family? Olivia looked at Ethan. The Wright family, Ethan replied. Wright is the last name of Crystal's maternal grandfather. But this young girl you're talking about. Elation flashed across Olivia's eyes. I should have thought of that sooner. I didn't expect that such a coincidence would exist. When the Kingston family took Molly in, she happened to be 7 years old, and she was also washed away by the flood. Also, remember the purple ivy I told you about? That's the main ingredient for the poison Molly was given. That's why I was wondering about the coincidence. If Molly was that child, then she's the Heath family's. Ethan and Olivia didn't dare to waste more time. Sir, where's the Wright residence? It's just ahead of us. You only have to round a bend to get there. I know why Yale is here now. Yesterday, Molly received a shock after she hit her head. I performed an acupuncture treatment on her head, so she must have remembered something. Come on, the truth must be in the Wright residence. Olivia ran while dragging Ethan with her. Ethan assured her, slow down. The truth won't become lies, nor will lies become the truth. The truth is there, and it won't leave. Olivia's eyes were filled with tears as she sincerely felt happy for Molly. If my guess is correct, then Molly is my aunt. It'd be wonderful if it's her. Ethan, you have no idea what she went through. Chapter 1343. Olivia had gone through similar pain before, so she wanted to help Molly out. No one in this world has suffered as much as you have. Ethan caressed Olivia's hair. Then, he ran to their destination while holding Olivia's hand. Linus and Yale had already bumped into each other. They found it weird to encounter each other at a place like this. Why are you here? Yale looked at Linus coldly. I can't believe you'd do this for Crystal's sake. Ever since he set boundaries at the Heath residence, Yale no longer treated Linus with respect. His expression was filled with impatience. Linus was slightly impressed by Yale's behavior. Don't get me wrong. While it's true that I came for Crystal, I'm not here to clear her name. Yale didn't believe that at all. After all, the Heath family was known to defend their kin. They wouldn't just sit by and watch their family get into trouble. Then, what are you doing here? I can't tell you that. The two wanted to go in together, but neither of them made way for the other. The atmosphere was extremely tense. Olivia's voice rang out behind them. Uncle Linus, Mr. Kingston, you two came here for the same goal, so stop fighting. The two exchanged glances. They were simultaneously thinking about Olivia's words. How could their goals be the same? Olivia jogged up to them, panting a little. Mr. Kingston, if my guess is correct, you came here to help Molly find her family, right? Yale's gaze fell upon Ethan. He wondered what Ethan had done to eavesdrop on his conversations this time. Why are you looking at me? I'm not interested in your love life anyway. When Ethan said that, it meant that he already knew about Yale and Molly's relationship. But things had come to this point, and Yale had already gone all out. He was even going to exact revenge on the Heath family. What else would he fear? Olivia guessed something from Ethan's words as well. Only Linus was oblivious to their relationship. The relationship between the three was quite interesting. They were like countries at odds with each other. Come on, this isn't the time to be talking about these things. Mr. Kingston, your sister was washed away by the flood in the past, right? Yes, there was a huge flood in this fishing village more than 20 years ago. Also, I spotted a plant called purple ivy on the cliff by the sea. Purple ivy is the main ingredient in the poison your sister is afflicted with. Your sister has lived here before. Yale nodded. I'm sure of that now. This morning, Molly remembered some things, and she gave me these clues. Linus shifted. Liv, do you mean that his sister is? Yale looked at Linus in confusion. What does my sister have anything to do with you? What are you even doing here? I'm warning you, even if I have to risk my life, I won't let the Heath family hurt even a hair on her head. Seeing that things were getting tense between the two again, Olivia hastily explained, you're getting the wrong idea, Mr. Kingston. It's a long story. Yesterday, Grandpa noticed that something was off about Crystal's identity, so he carried out a DNA test in private. Yale didn't expect that. What did he find out? Crystal is not a daughter of the Heath family. She was switched out by the nanny as soon as she was born. Starting from the nanny's old home, we followed the clues, which led us here. But just now, at the entrance of the village, I could already guess the name of the girl who was switched. Yale recalled the fleeting thought in his mind yesterday. Molly did look a little like Tatiana. A thought appeared in his head. Chapter 1344. Yes, if my guess is correct, after switching the child back then, Lisa brought her back to her old home and asked her mother to raise the child. She also wanted the child to be fed poison every day so that it would look like the child had died because of ill health. Yale said, no wonder Molly said that she never had enough to eat, but she would always be given a bottle of milk. By the looks of it, the poison was in the milk. He gripped his fists tightly. There was a flood back then. Her grandmother tricked her and told her to go back to the house and get some important documents. That was why she was washed away by the flood and disappeared without a trace. When Linus heard how it all happened, his expression turned extremely cold. He couldn't care less about anything else as he kicked the door open. But the yard had been emptied for a long time. They didn't find any signs of people living there. It's deserted. A woman passing by spoke up. Are you looking for Madame Todd? She left a long time ago. Ma'am, are you familiar with the Todd family? Olivia didn't have any cash on her. She took off her pearl earrings and stuffed them into the woman's hands. The woman's eyes lit up when she saw them. Judging by these people's cars and clothes, she could tell that they were rich. They wouldn't give her fake stuff. She immediately stuffed the earrings into her pocket. Of course, we were neighbors for decades. I know tons of things about her family. Ma'am, has Madame Todd ever taken care of a little girl? Oh, yes, that girl. She was a pitiful little girl. I heard that her mother worked as a maid for a rich lady in the city, and that's amazing. Every time she came back to the village, she wore expensive stuff. She looked like she had become a rich lady herself. She also looked down on the rest of us, whom she grew up with. Olivia asked, were they nice to the little girl? No way. Lisa's father passed away when she was young. Her mother brought her along when she got married to Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright was an old codger, and he would do those sorts of things to Lisa since she was young. Later on, Lisa went to the city to look for work. After she made a name for herself, she never cared about her parents. Still, Lisa wasn't a decent person either. After she got rich, she didn't bring her daughter with her to live a better life in the city. She even sent her daughter to Madame Todd, who hated her. Quote, Madame Todd would hit and shout at the little girl from time to time. The little girl was small and skinny, and she never had enough to eat. I often brought her home to feed her. The woman sighed, but that girl was unlucky. When she was 7, she was washed away by the flood. Everything matched up now. Yale and Linus listened as the woman rambled on about the past. Molly lived her earlier years wandering and suffering, while the fake young lady lived a great life in her place. In the hospital, Tatiana was keeping Molly company. Molly's eyes were red, and tears welled up in her eyes. "What's wrong? Do you feel like crying again?" "Mrs. Heath, other than Yale, no one has been this nice to me before." Tatiana pulled Molly into her embrace. She felt her nose being blocked as well. "Silly child, I told you that I'll take good care of you in the future." The two found each other quite familiar. When the nurse came in and saw the scene, she thought that they were mother and daughter. After Tatiana's explanation, the nurse apologized and left. "I'm sorry, you two look so much alike that I thought she was your daughter." Tatiana studied Molly in detail. Most of the swelling on Molly's face had subsided, so her true appearance was revealed. Her eyebrows and eyes looked a lot like the members of the Benson family. What was going on? Was it a coincidence? Molly smiled self-mockingly. "Mrs. Heath, how could someone like me be worthy of resembling you?" Linus' call came in, and Tatiana answered the call. "What did you say?" "Molly is." The phone in Tatiana's hand fell to the floor. Tatiana was shocked. Molly looked at her, puzzled. "What's the matter, Mrs. Heath?" Taishan pulled Molly into her embrace as tears streamed down her face. "Child, stop calling me Mrs. Heath. Call me Mom." Chapter 1345. Molly looked at Tatiana in disbelief. "Mrs. Heath, what was that you just said?" There were tears in Tatiana's eyes. "It may sound ridiculous, but you're most probably my daughter." She told Molly the whole incident. Then, she asked a doctor to conduct a DNA test for them. After everything was done, Molly still felt like she was dreaming. She felt quite dizzy. How did she suddenly become Tatiana's daughter? Molly still didn't dare to believe it as long as the results weren't out yet. Tatiana was elated. Molly's life was not in danger, so Tatiana insisted that Molly go back as soon as possible to recuperate. While Tatiana was telling Alfred to make the preparations, Adalia came over happily. "You wench, you're quite lucky to be alive, as expected. I can't believe you didn't die." Adalia spoke as she walked in, but she bumped into Tatiana, who was calling Alfred, the butler. When their eyes met, Adalia felt a chill run down her spine. In an instant, she felt as if a ferocious beast had its eyes on her. Tatiana's smile froze on her lips as she coldly ended the call. "Yes, that's all. I'll leave it to you. Mrs. Heath, this child is so lucky to have you visit her again today." "What did you just say?" Tatiana wouldn't play along, of course. Her dark eyes were staring coldly at Adalia. Adalia could sense that Tatiana was upset, but she believed that pleasing Tatiana would always be the right choice. Believing that Tatiana was doing all this for Crystal, Adalia said pleasingly, "Don't worry, Mrs. Heath. Our family won't pursue this matter. This child won't kick the bucket so easily, and even if she really does die, it has nothing to do with Miss Crystal." Lifting her hand, Tatiana slapped Adalia across the face. The marks from Adalia's slap yesterday could still be faintly seen on Molly's face. Now, Adalia was bold enough to behave like this in front of Tatiana. Tatiana couldn't believe it. Covering her cheek, Adalia looked at Tatiana in disbelief. "Mrs. Heath, what are you?" "I'm returning the slap to you. In the future, if you dare touch even a hair on her head." Adalia couldn't take it anymore. "Mrs. Heath, I respect you and even sincerely care about your daughter. What are you doing?" The results weren't out yet, so Tatiana decided not to reveal Molly's identity for now. With a foul look on her face, Tatiana said, "There's only one thing you need to know. From now on, Molly is a part of the Heath family. I won't allow anyone to mistreat her. Mrs. Kingston, she's in ill health, so stop causing more trouble here. Please leave." Hence, Adalia was driven out. She scratched her head in confusion, thinking, "I'm Molly's adoptive mother, right? What's going on?" After Adalia left, Tatiana smiled gently. "Don't be scared, Molly. I'll take you home. In the future, no one will dare to bully you." Molly wanted to acknowledge their bond, but she feared that there might be a misunderstanding. A nervous look flashed across her face. "Mrs. Heath, what if I'm not your daughter at all? Even so, I'll make you, my goddaughter. Olivia and the others hurried back to the hospital room as well. At that moment, the results were out, and Tatiana cried in joy as she held the test report in her hands. As soon as Linus came in, he saw Tatiana in emotional tears. "Mom," with trembling lips, Tatiana said, "Linus, come here. This is your sister." Linus glanced at the DNA test report, and then at Molly, who looked extremely anxious. They didn't grow up together, and he was also a strict brother. For a moment, he didn't know what to do to express his overwhelming emotions. My sister." Meanwhile, Olivia walked up to Molly as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Holding Molly's fingers, she said gently, "Nice to meet you, Aunt Molly." Chapter 1346. Olivia was elated that Molly turned out to be her aunt. In the past, she couldn't get along with Crystal at all, but she had to put up with the arrogant Crystal for Mason's sake. If it were Molly, then her regret would be resolved. Dr. Vanessa, your face." Olivia didn't change her appearance today, so she revealed her true face. When Molly saw Olivia's almost flawless face, she was so stunned that she became a little tongue-tied. "Sorry. For certain reasons, I had to change my identity. This is my real face. Aunt Molly, I'm sure Grandpa will be elated to see you." Tatiana held Olivia's hands. "Because of Crystal, there were some grudges between you and me. Liv, Molly has gone through a lot, so I hope that you won't hold a grudge against her because of what happened in the past." Olivia assured her, saying, "Grandma, I completely understand. I had started thinking of her as my patient a long time ago. No matter who she is, I'll do my best to heal her." Tatiana nodded. Then, she turned to look at Yale, who was standing at the entrance. "Yale, you played a huge role in ensuring that Molly managed to survive thus far. I'll pretend that you never said those words at the Heath residence. Since you've treated my daughter so well, the Heath family will give you your due reward." When Yale thought about Tatiana, who was about to take Molly away, he felt both tragic and pathetic. In the past, he tried so hard to get everything. Unexpectedly, when he decided to throw everything away, he actually got it without much effort. Sadly, after this whole incident with Molly, Yale had already made up his mind. He slowly walked toward Molly and stood in front of Tatiana. Lowering his head, he said earnestly, "Mrs. Heath, I'm glad that you and Molly have acknowledged each other and that Molly has found her family. But even if you're her mother, you can't take her away." Tatiana's smile froze on her face. "What do you mean by that? In the past, I betrayed everything, including my soul, for the benefit of the Kingston family. But I have long gotten sick of that life. From today onward, I want to live for myself." Tatiana frowned. "What exactly are you trying to say? What does your life have to do with me taking my daughter home? It's not like I'm forbidding you from seeing each other." Yale went on his knees. He knew that if they looked into it, they would eventually figure some things out. At this point, he no longer feared anything. Yale said slowly, "The person I truly love is Molly. The child she lost was also mine." In her joy, Tatiana didn't expect to hear such alarming news. To her, Yale was a caring brother, so how could a brother do such a thing with his sister? Tatiana was so startled that she took a few steps backward. Olivia hastily supported her. Olivia wasn't surprised at all. Yale was willing to do so much for Molly, so she wouldn't believe it if they simply treated each other as siblings. Linus frowned deeply. He wanted to say something, but he suppressed it when he looked at Molly's current condition. Besides, it was only his second time meeting her even though he was her real brother. He didn't say a word. An extremely intimidating voice rang out at the door. "What did you say?" Molly looked at the entrance. Rows of bodyguards had stepped aside to give way to an old man in his 50s. The old man calmly and slowly walked forward. It was a face Molly had only seen on the news before. It felt surreal to her. Molly was stunned. She couldn't believe that the extremely noble man was her father. Chapter 1347. Molly seemed to be panicking as she tried to get out of bed to welcome Mason. Tatiana quickly held her down. "Lie down and stay still." Yale was aware of the consequences if he told the truth, but he didn't expect Mason to come to the hospital in person. When Mason appeared, his terrifying presence filled every corner of the room. Yale said in a low voice, "Mr. Heath." Mason didn't even spare Yale a glance. Walking right past Yale, Mason went to Molly. At that moment, the red mark on Molly's face had faded quite a lot. Mason could clearly see the similarities between Molly's pale face and Tatiana's contours. Her eyes were the same as Tatiana's mother's. "So, you're Molly." "Yes, Mr. Heath." "I'm." "Silly child. Why are you calling him Mr. Heath? He's your father. Call him Dad," Tatiana reminded her. Dad?" Molly looked at the man in front of her, stunned. He looked older than on TV, and there were wrinkles near the corners of his eyes and on his forehead. Silver hair was also peeking out near his temples. Mason examined Molly carefully. His gaze was filled with tenderness and love. "Molly, I'm sorry for being late." Mason had a look of heartache on his face as he pulled her into his embrace. "Child, I'm sorry for taking so long to find you. You must have suffered a lot." Molly had also once imagined what her father would be like, but she never expected Mason to be her father. Molly felt suffocated and nervous with Mason hugging her like that. "It's okay, I'm fine. We've finally found you after such a long time. Are you willing to come home with us? We'll make it up to you." A warm look flashed across Mason's eyes. Molly had always been a soft-hearted and kind person. She wasn't good at saying no. She was about to nod, but out of the corner of her eye, she spotted Yale. He was standing upright. Seeing him, she collected her thoughts. She didn't forget the person who had risked his life to protect her all this while. "Dad, I want to be with Yale." Molly lowered her head. "In the past, Yale did lots of bad things for power, but he did all that for me. For my sake, he has cut off ties with the Kingston family. If I leave him too, he'll truly be all alone." Tatiana recalled what Yale said some time ago. She immediately felt as if her head was buzzing. Yale not only impregnated the faker, but he also caused Molly to lose her child. "Yale, you damned jerk." Tatiana was so mad that she gnashed her teeth. "Mrs. Heath, I know that no matter what I say, it won't change the deeds that I've done. My life exists only for Molly. If you insist on taking her away, you might as well kill me." He was well aware that if Molly was taken away, it would be very difficult for him to meet her again. If that were the case, he would rather not have looked for Molly's family. Molly anxiously tried to get out of bed. She felt bad for being stuck in the middle. On one hand, there was her family, whom she had been wishing for. On the other hand, there was the love of her life. Olivia suggested, setting aside Aunt Molly and Mr. Kingston's relationship, Aunt Molly's health takes priority. "Aunt Molly, if you can return to the Heath residence, it'll be easier for Grandma to take care of you. I can also help you recuperate. Of course, it's easier for the body to recover at home instead of in the hospital." Mason hastily nodded. Olivia had just made a point when she continued, "However, I have also seen how sincerely Mr. Kingston treats Aunt Molly. For Aunt Molly's sake, Mr. Kingston was willing to abandon glory and wealth, even his future, by cutting ties with the Kingston family. I can see that he's serious about her. He has taken care of Aunt Molly for so many years, and it wouldn't be nice for us to take her away so suddenly. So, I think that Mr. Kingston should stay in the Heath residence for the moment. As for the other matters, we can discuss them after Aunt Molly has recovered." But Tatiana still couldn't come to terms with Yale's deeds. Chapter 1348. Olivia added, "Aunt Molly loves Mr. Kingston. If we forcefully separate them, she'll definitely be upset about it. It won't be good for her recovery either." Olivia had voiced out Molly's truest thoughts. Molly nodded excitedly. "Exactly." Tatiana and Mason exchanged glances. They had finally found their precious daughter, and she also happened to be an extremely fragile girl. Of course, they couldn't bring themselves to hurt her. "All right, we'll do as Liv said." Mason looked at Yale. "You don't have any objections, do you?" Yale's expression was stern. "I'll go wherever Molly goes." "All right then, we'll take Molly home now." The Heath family had prepared thick sleeping bags early on. They used the sleeping bags to wrap Molly up securely. No one had expected things to come to this point. Molly's relationship with Yale was one of the surprises. Mason, Olivia, and Linus got in the same car. In the car, Mason put a hand to his temple as he frowned deeply. He looked extremely tired. "Liv, how exactly is Molly?" Olivia truthfully told Mason about Molly's condition. "Back then, when I bumped into Molly at the hospital, I still had no idea that she was the adopted daughter of the Kingston family. Because of her illness, I took an interest in her and got to know her. After the ruckus Crystal made, she almost lost her life. Even if Aunt Molly survives, she'll have to rest and recuperate properly in the future. Liv, I'll leave Molly's health in your hands." Mason sighed. "Don't worry, Grandpa, it doesn't matter whether we're related or not, I'll take good care of Aunt Molly either way." Mason frowned deeply. He thought that Olivia was exaggerating it on purpose, but now, he realized that Molly's body was even weaker than he had imagined. When they arrived at the Heath residence, the car slowly pulled up. Yale looked at the entrance. In the past, he dreamed of entering this place. Now, he managed to come in thanks to Molly. He didn't feel happy about it at all. After all, people had found out about Molly. She was no longer a precious treasure that belonged only to him. Huge changes had taken place in the Heath family, but Crystal was still kept in the dark. She had no idea about it. After making a fuss in the morning, she was given some plain pasta instead. Of course, she threw the food on the floor. Crystal had starved for an entire day, and no one responded to her cries. Now, she had finally felt fear. She knew that the Heath family was getting serious now. When Crystal heard the footsteps outside, she opened the window to see Tatiana hurrying past. "Mom, where did you go? Please save me, they're starving me to death." Now that Tatiana had found her biological daughter, she was mad at this faker. At that moment, she didn't have time to care about Crystal at all. She was only concerned about helping Molly recuperate. She simply gave Crystal a cold glance. "Don't call me Mom, I'm not your mother." The simple sentences expressed her disgust toward Crystal. Crystal could only watch as Tatiana left in a hurry. At that moment, she felt as if she had been abandoned. No, it couldn't be. Tatiana loved her so much. How could Tatiana abandon her? Crystal believed that Tatiana was just mad at her because the incident this time was too tricky to deal with. After Tatiana had ceased her anger, she would come over to coax Crystal again. Crystal frantically searched for excuses in her mind. Soon, she saw Tatiana coming out with a bowl of chicken noodle soup. The fragrance of the chicken noodle soup wafted in along with the cold wind. Crystal had been starving for the whole day, and she only had the snacks in her room to ease her hunger. When she caught the scent of food, her stomach rumbled. She said joyfully, "Mom, I knew you were the best. I'm so hungry. I want to eat the chicken noodle soup you made." Tatiana didn't even pause in her tracks as she replied coldly, "You're not worthy." Chapter 1349. Crystal could still come up with excuses for what Tatiana previously said, but at that moment, Tatiana looked at Crystal as if she was looking at a stranger. No, it was even worse. Tatiana seemed to think of Crystal as her enemy. Crystal couldn't understand how her mother, who loved her so much, would look at her with such a cold gaze. Crystal asked in disbelief, "Mom, what did you just say?" Tatiana couldn't be bothered with Crystal. She was about to leave, but when Crystal saw her leaving, Crystal hastily said, "Mom, I'm hungry. Evil people like you deserve to starve to death." Tatiana hurriedly left with the bowl of chicken noodle soup in her hands. She wasn't returning to her room, nor was she going to Mason's study. Who did she make the soup for? Crystal began to panic, and she insisted on going out. The people standing guard outside had quite a lot of reinforcements. With orders from Linus, they wouldn't spoil Crystal like they used to. "Sorry, Miss Heath, but you can't leave now." As Crystal gazed at the snowy scene outside, she sensed that something was beginning to change. She panicked. Tatiana brought the steaming bowl of soup to Molly. "Eat it while it's hot. From now on, I'll be in charge of your meals. I'll definitely feed you lots, so you have to get better soon too." Molly nodded. Linus went in and out of the room, arranging the place as Olivia had instructed. Mason was also sitting at the side, watching Molly carefully. After all, he didn't have experience in taking care of a daughter. By the time Crystal returned to him, she had already grown up. Later on, he expressed his fatherly love to Crystal by meeting all her needs. Molly was completely different from Crystal. She had a careful and shy personality. He felt his heart ache when he saw her like that. He was also worried that he might accidentally hurt her. If you need anything, just tell us. This is your home from now on, so you don't have to hold back, alright? Molly nodded. She glanced around her, but she couldn't see Yale anywhere. She felt a little worried. Dad, where's Yale? Mason and Tatiana could see that she wasn't used to it at all. To her, Yale was the only person she could depend on. She was already used to receiving protection from that man. He's unpacking in the room next door. He'll be here right away. It was only then that Molly relaxed. Molly was like a flower. After she received attentive care from her family, color finally returned to her face. She didn't look as pale as before. Yale never went anywhere. He stayed in the Heath residence and kept her company. After being neglected for a few days, Crystal finally realized that something was off. One day, she grabbed a knife and fought her way through the guards. She managed to get downstairs. She wanted to find her family members and ask them what exactly happened, as well as why no one had come over to visit her in days. She also wanted to know what happened to that wench, Molly, and if Yale still wanted to sue her. Crystal heard Tatiana's voice coming from the guest room on the first floor. Running over to the room, she kicked the door open. Mom, she never expected to see the scene in front of her. Molly was leaning against the couch with a blanket covering her legs. Yale was half crouched next to her, and he was feeding her spoonful of freshly baked potatoes. Tatiana's actions were even more unbelievable. She was knitting yarn with the knitting needles in her hands. Molly, if you like cats, I can get Linus to bring a cat or two home for you. What breeds do you like? They were smiling, and they looked like a family. Crystal looked like a stranger in comparison. Because Crystal had kicked the door open, a strong cold breeze blew in. In an instant, the people in the room turned to look at her. Tatiana was upset. What are you doing here? Crystal saw Molly, who looked a little panicked, and also Yale, who was feeding Molly. The feeling of being stabbed in the back flashed across her heart. Mom, why is she here? Chapter 1350. Tatiana patted Molly's hand to ease her nervousness. Don't be scared, Molly. This is your home. When Crystal heard that, she lost her mind. Mom, what nonsense are you saying? How can my home be hers? In the past few days, everyone had been taking care of Molly, so no one was bothered about Crystal. After being neglected for a few days, Crystal was already quite anxious. When she saw Molly in the Heath residence, the seed of unease grew deeper in her heart. Your home, Tatiana sneered. Oh, right, we haven't told you about your background. My background. Crystal was panicking even more now. Mom, don't joke about these things. It's not funny at all. No one is joking here. Well, since you're here, we'll tell the whole truth. Tatiana looked at the bodyguards standing at the entrance. Get Lisa here. Molly had gotten much better in the past days, so she could get revenge for what was done to her years ago. Mom, don't do this to me. This is a matter between us, so why are you asking for Lisa? Crystal felt even less assured now. When Tatiana heard that, she sneered. Lisa, Mom, what exactly happened to you? Seeing that Tatiana was ignoring her, Crystal went up to Yale and flew into a rage. Yale, I'm pregnant with your child, but instead of taking care of me and our child, you're taking care of this wench instead. What's wrong with you? When Crystal appeared, Yale was reminded of Crystal's violent acts that day. If Crystal hadn't been in the Heath residence for the past few days, she would have died a long time ago. Crystal wasn't appreciative of that, and now, she was even bold enough to behave recklessly in front of Yale. Yale was half crouching, so he suddenly leapt to his feet. His already tall figure looked even more intimidating as he reached out and strangled Crystal. He didn't hide the murderous intent surrounding his whole body at all. He slammed Crystal's body against the wall. Crystal was shocked. After all, Yale had always behaved like a simp toward her. Even after Crystal did those things to Molly that day, Yale merely shrugged it off. At that moment, as Yale closed his hands around her neck, Crystal almost couldn't breathe. She slapped Yale's hands with all her might. "Yale, are you crazy? How dare you attack me in the Heath residence?" Yale slowly tightened his grip. He wished that he could strangle Crystal to death right now. "Mom, save me." Yale is out of his mind. Tatiana didn't pause her movements. She simply glanced at them coldly and said, "Yale, don't do it in the Heath residence." What did that mean? Was Yale allowed to do it once they were outside of the Heath residence? Yale glared viciously at Crystal. He didn't want to let go at all, but then Molly got up. The blanket on her knees dropped to the floor. "Yale, don't do this." Yale and Tatiana moved simultaneously. Yale let go of Crystal whereas Tatiana tossed her knitting to the side. They rushed up to Molly at the same time. "Molly, you should sit down and rest." Crystal, who was cast aside, slid onto the floor. She looked at the woman who was being supported by Yale and Tatiana at the same time. A look of intense jealousy and dissatisfaction flashed across her eyes. "Mom, I'm your real daughter. I was almost strangled to death just now." Dragging Lisa with him, Linus came in and gave a forceful shove. Crystal hastily ran up to him. "Linus, do something. Yale was trying to strangle me to death." Linus coldly looked down at her. "Let her tell you whose daughter you truly are." "Linus, what do you mean by this? I just hit her, nothing else. Why have you all changed?" Lisa barely managed to gain her balance. When she saw Molly's face, which was quite similar to Tatiana's, she instantly realized what had happened. She didn't expect Molly to still be alive. Molly didn't die from the poison, nor did she drown in the flood. She even arrived at the Heath residence in one piece. "Lisa, I know you care about me the most. What exactly is going on?" Crystal helplessly shook Lisa's arm.